Good afternoon. This morning I convened the largest, strongest group of countries yet behind a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. We agreed we will keep increasing the pressure on Russia, keep the military aid flowing to Ukraine, and keep tightening the restrictions on Russia's economy to weaken Putin's war machine and bring him to the table. Our militaries will meet on Thursday this week here in the United Kingdom to put strong and robust plans in place to swing in behind a peace deal and guarantee Ukraine's future security.
Very bold words. That is UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer 2 days ago addressing the convening of a group that he says is going to be, as he pointed out there, guaranteeing the security of Ukraine going forward. And he has this coalition of the willing, which they subsequently went on to say numbered 37 different nations, a bunch from Europe and some from outside, and made some pretty bold claims about what they're going to do. They're going to finally put the pressure on Russia. It's going to force Vladimir Putin to come to the table. It's going to cause him to make terms that are actually beneficial to Kiev and certainly beneficial to the West. And part of his coalition of the willing means that they're going to have a robust military capacity. And by the robust, they mean something that could be closer to a peace enforcement group, not just like blue helmets that you may have seen in the past and over the last decades from UN peacekeepers who basically had the ability to defend themselves, but they were there to monitor peace. This version that Keir Starmer is talking about, and apparently they're going to meet here just within days again with their military components, is to have a robust peace enforcement unit that has the capacity to fight Russia in case they don't abide by a peace agreement. The phrase he used there was that this force will swing in behind an agreement and go into several places. They're kicking around several different options for where the troops would go. Would they be actually on the front line? Would they be in certain locations kind of in the operational rear where they could be deployed to different places? They're still kicking around some of those kind of issues here. But all of this assumes that there's going to be a peace to either monitor or enforce. And the more you start to look at what's going on with this coalition of the willing, the more we have to ask some really pointed questions. And again, we keep doing this all the time. We're bringing in common sense. We're bringing in just a cold-blooded analysis, what you can do, what you can't do, what's possible, what's not possible. And as we always do, and for some reason, the Western side seems almost never to do this, we look at both sides of the equation. What is the Russian side saying? What is their capacity? What can they do? What can't they do? See, if you don't look at the whole equation, then you have almost no chance to actually produce anything of any value, anything that can succeed. And, if you're talking about you want to put your own national security on the line, if you want to put your own economic security on the line, if you want to put the viability of your economy and your reputation, if you want to put all that on the line, it seems just in your self-interest that you would want to make sure that this can work. Now, definitions are important too. Now, you heard him say in the first part of that clip there that he wants a just and enduring peace or lasting and enduring peace. There's several versions of that, but they're about the same that continually are used by a lot of senior European leaders. Now, so far, they have not addressed or defined what that actually means. How do you define a just and lasting peace? And that is vital. That is not something that any Western journalist should leave off the table. Every time these guys say that, the microphone needs to go right back in their face, and the reporter needs to say, what is a just and lasting peace? How do you define that? Because that is critical to anything. If you want to know whether any kind of military force can accomplish its military objectives, which means can produce a political outcome that you want, that's the reason why you're using military force. What is it, the objective, the political objective? What is the definition of it? Because, for example, if you say a just and lasting peace means, well, the war comes to an end. Russia is satisfied to their satisfaction and they're not going to continue to fight anymore. And once that's met, then we'll just stop fighting and that'll be the end. Now, some may define that as a just and lasting peace because the conditions that led to the war in the first place have been addressed. And so there's no more reason for any sides to fight. But there may be a different interpretation on the Western side. And as it turns out, former NATO commander General Wes Clark was asked that very question. To this guy's credit, this is a Ukrainian journalist who had him on a show. He asked the hard question. Here's how that went.
What is a just and long-lasting peace? Everyone says that. Like,
it would be the withdrawal of Russian forces from Donbass and Crimea. You'll give them a naval base at Sevastopol. They'll return all the children who've been abducted. They'll pay reparations, and they'll also turn over to the International Criminal Court those people who have been charged with international war crimes. It's not likely to happen, and it's a very sad thing because for 80 years we've tried to build an international environment in which the rule of law, territorial integrity, human rights are respected.
Okay, now General Wes Clark himself is an American, obviously, but he's a four-star general who was the NATO Supreme Allied Commander in the 1990s, and he is very tightly tied to Europe. So we can't automatically say that the definition he gave is the one that they gave, but based on what they're saying in Europe, based on actions that are taken and statements they continue to make at both the international or at the individual nation level, as well as in forums like the one that Keir Starmer was in 2 days ago, implies that is what they're thinking. And that's not too far afield to say that's what they have in mind. Now, the question is going to be, is there any reality to that? I mean, Russia withdraws, not that they're forced out, not that they're driven out, that they just withdraw. Somehow you convince them that that's not in their interest to do so, that they pay war reparations, that they submit themselves to international courts to face war crimes charges. And you know, the list just goes on and on. The list could have stopped at one, because there is no military force in the history of mankind over several thousands of years that has ever said, okay, you know what, I'll tell you what, the side that's on the verge of being defeated, that's definitely on the lower power side, they just said, yeah, I want the higher power to do that. And the higher power went, okay. It's never happened. So why do these guys think that's going to happen? Why would General Clark, former NATO commander, even say that out loud? That's what he thinks would be a just and lasting peace. That would not be a just and lasting peace. Let me just categorically say that. That is dead wrong. That you can change the phrase that was the definition that he gave and said that would apply to, here's the way we would like the war to work out. That you can say. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. But that would not lead to a just and lasting peace. That would lead to another war later, or just the escalation of the one we're fighting for. If that is what you're trying to get accomplished, Europe, if that's the objective you're trying to foist onto the situation, you're going to run afoul of the United States, number one, because that's not our objective. And you're going to run afoul of the Russians, because that most assuredly is not their objective. They have a rather different one. In fact, to that exact same statement, a fair and lasting peace, a just and lasting peace, Russia has decidedly different definitions for that as well. But the European side so far, and those in the United States who back this view, don't seem to recognize that. Because again, you have to get back to self-interest. If your interests are to succeed in something, it seems that you would not set grotesquely unrealistic objectives and then physically put some force behind it to try to figure it out. Now, for all the bluster, that was on the 15th. That statement was made by Keir Starmer on the 15th of this month. And then the next day, a little bit of crack in the solidarity among some good people in UK who are very much behind what the government would like to do, but a little bit of realism snuck in from British Lord Ricketts, who is a former national security advisor for the British Prime Minister.
I think Keir Starmer has done an excellent job in the 3 weeks since that ambush in the Oval Office in pulling the Europeans together, in developing a plan for how Europe can really make a contribution towards peace in Ukraine. And I can absolutely see why he's promoting the idea of a military force. But I've been in the room many times as a policymaker when ministers were deciding to put troops into Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. And it's now you've got to ask the tough questions. Because the intentions are absolutely honest, of course, and I respect that. But what would a European force actually do in Ukraine? We hear much of this term, a reassurance force, which sounds quite reassuring. What it really means is a deterrent force, I think, a force capable of deterring Putin from going back to war in Ukraine. To be credible, a deterrence force has to be willing to fight. So are we actually saying that this force might one day have to fight the Russians in Ukraine? I think it's a genuine question. And the way to avoid it, of course, is to have a cast-iron American guarantee that if the force got into trouble, the Americans would come in and support. That's what the backstop means. I just don't think Trump is going to give that kind of commitment.
Well, that's pretty self-evident that Trump is not willing to give a backstop security guarantee. But he raised the questions that have to be asked. And the question I have, why isn't that front and center? Why aren't all the British media members sticking a microphone in Keir Starmer as soon as he finished making his statement and immediately asked that question? Are you saying that you want to put a force in the field that could literally fight Russia if they don't abide by the terms, however the thing should end up being over? But in your conception of things, there will be this contingent of UK soldiers, of French soldiers, German, Italian, who knows? I guess there's 37 nations. We'll see who all would actually contribute ground troops to that. But are you saying that you want them to be able to fight Russia? So let's understand what that means. Let's say for the moment, for hypothetical, that an agreement is finally reached, whatever the terms are. The war has come to an end and there is a demarcation line, wherever that would end up. But there is a line there. And so British troops are deployed in there in some number. Then there has to be some decent number to have a credible capability to fight. And then all of a sudden, X period of time into the future, 3 years, 2 years, whatever, Russia has something happens on one of the points and they break it and they go back on the offensive. They want to take a village across the line, something. Are you prepared, Mr. Prime Minister, right now? Are you prepared, the other 36 members of this alliance, are you prepared to have your troops engage in direct firefights with the Russian Federation, knowing that they have, a somewhat bigger force than you do? I think the total number I've heard so far is that this coalition of the willing could have 30,000, 40,000 troops involved. And they initially, you may recall, Zelensky back in December, I think it was saying he wanted 200,000. And then they said, well, okay, maybe that's a little high from the European side. Maybe we can get 100,000. Now that they're actually having the meetings, you're saying maybe 30 or 40,000. And so you still are having this, at least with your mouth, saying you want a robust defense capacity to enforce the peace once it's on there. They're going to roll in, to use Keir Starmer's phrase, to enforce the peace, to keep to prevent anything from going sideways. Then that's why Lord Ricketts asked the question, are you saying that this force will be there to fight? Because if it's not, what's it there for? Seriously. If you're going to put a force on the ground, and if Russia then violates the terms that, as you postulate, and you're not willing to fight, then what are you there for? What is the purpose of the force? So almost by definition, the answer is going to be yes. So you would risk UK and Russia getting into a war. Because here's the thing, President Trump has already said, and Secretary of Defense Hegseth has said, if you send any troops in there, if Russia agrees, that's also an important point. But let's just, again, hypothetically say that they agree. Then you're saying, okay, there won't be a Article 5, the U.S. side has said. So Article 5 of the NATO treaty is if one is attacked, then the rest can come to their aid. There is no provision inside of the Article 5 provision of the NATO treaty that says if one of the Western nations attacks into Russia or gets in or chooses to enter into a war, into a hostility where there's already fighting going on, and then they get into a conflict right there, especially if the British side goes in and takes on the Russians, that is by definition an offensive operation. Ergo, we won't come to that defense because that will be a self-inflicted wound. And the United States, I certainly can't speak for the president, but I would certainly advise, if I were ever in a position, any president that we would ever have, that we should not get into a war with Russia, which could all too easily and almost certainly would escalate into a nuclear conflict because somebody else in Europe chose to go fight the Russians on their front porch. I mean, that would be the height of stupidity. There's no kinder way to put it. I'm sorry. Yet that seems to be where we're going. Now, back to Lord Ricketts. On the one hand, he asked a really hard question. So I'm grateful for that. I give him great credit for that. I give credit for the British media to put that out there and to include that in their discussion. But the further the conversation went on, then it kind of went back to the unrealistic territory.
Well, the best conceivable outcome is that the war finishes with Ukraine clearly coming out of it as a country with its independence, with its right to decide its own future, with its right to move towards NATO, and Russia having clearly lost. Realistically, Ukraine's not going to drive Russia out of every inch of Ukrainian territory, but an outcome where Russia is seen to have failed in what it did, started 3 years ago. That would be the best outcome. I have to say there's quite a high likelihood that a ceasefire, even it can be achieved, won't last, and that for the next year or so we may well see the fighting continuing.
Okay, a couple of things there. His definition sounded suspiciously similar to the one voiced by Wes Clark that we showed you a second ago. The best case scenario is that Russia's out of there, but then he even said it's unlikely that Ukraine will be able to drive Russia out of every square kilometer. Folks, there's no chance that you're going to drive Russia out of 1 square kilometer. We've already tried that. This is not a theoretical point on my position here. This is history. This is tangible, metric-driven evidence confirmed on the battlefield. Nobody has to take anyone's word for it. We gave Ukraine every advantage we could possibly give it. We gave it like MiG aircraft in late 2022, heading into 2023. They wanted to do an offensive operation. I advocated against that. I said that has almost no chance of success. Even if it had limited success, the overall balance of power between the two sides, Russia would end up consuming that and moving it backwards. I said that 2 months before they started. But nevertheless, they wanted to go forward. So we gave them, as the cumulative West, some Soviet-era aircraft. We gave them all kinds of artillery systems, tank fighting vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles, all kinds of other armored vehicles. On top of that, millions of rounds of artillery shells, rockets, air defense systems, air defense missiles, intelligence support, targeting support, physical training, everything you can possibly imagine. And you can fill in the blank. If you've been watching this show before, it broke its teeth on the first line of defense. They didn't even get through the first line, much less to the second, third, fourth, and fifth one. Russia was prepared. Russia thought that the offensive would do better than it did because they had multiple lines ready to go into this, but it turned out to not be necessary because it failed. What possible rationalization can you give now after you utterly failed in 2023 to penetrate the first line of Russian defenses, and in the whatever it is, 17, 18 months since that time, Russia transitioned to the offensive where they remain to this hour, continuing to go forward. And the Ukraine side, with all of the stuff, the $61 billion package the U.S. gave, scores of other multi-billion-dollar packages given by various EU countries, none of it slowed it down. I mean, truly, just imagine the reality of what they're saying. They're saying that everything that has physically happened in the past 3 years, yeah, but this time it'll be different. And we're hopeful that this time it's going to be different. In addition to the fact that you have President Donald Trump that is clearly saying there's not going to be any more from the U.S. Famously, after Ukraine agreed in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia last week to agree to seek a 30-day ceasefire, Trump turned back on the intelligence sharing and turned back on the spigots for the equipment and ammunition and whatnot that was flowing into Ukraine. That was the spigot that was from the Biden administration. There hasn't even been a discussion about any new packages, about any additional support on top of that. And it would be a radical shift for President Trump, and I can't imagine him doing it. But right now, there's not even a possibility of it. Ergo, once this spigot runs out and there's no more juice behind it, then even what you have is not going to be able to continue fighting. The European side in its entirety doesn't have enough capacity Forget about the will for a moment. They don't have the capacity to maintain the capacity on the Russian side. So any way you want to look at this coalition of the willing is going after something that's just completely impossible. And because there are two sides to this argument and there are two sides to this equation, unlike nearly everybody else in the West, we're going to look at the Russian side of the equation. Here is a guy named Karaganov, who was a former advisor to Putin and is still a confidant of Putin and Lavrov, so still connected at the highest levels of government. Also on British media, he was interviewed. And again, kudos to the British media. They are listening to him. They sought his advice. Need to make sure that people are listening to this because what he said here is very instructive.
You say that Russia wants to crush the will of the European nations in all this for the third time in a century. So are you blaming the Europeans for provoking a fight with Russia?
Yes, absolutely. Europeans have been the main driving force for pushing for NATO expansion. Americans are to be blamed too, but now they understood the price and they start to withdraw.
But it was Russia that invaded Ukraine.
I am sorry, but we have been telling me personally too for 27 or more years that if NATO expands towards the borders of Ukraine and close to Russia, by the way, against all promises, there will be war. The only thing I regret is that we waited for too long and we trusted our European neighbors for too long, or for these all kind of Minsk processes.
So a couple of things you said is very important. Again, you don't have to agree with anything he's saying. You can say all the things he said are untrue. What is you can't undo, though, is say he believes what he's saying. And this is critical to understand when you're talking about trying to get a negotiated settlement, when you're trying to find something that's with this coalition of the willing that's going to get the Russians to do something you want, you have to take in mind what they say, what they believe, because that governs their actions. Just like what you say and what you believe is governing your actions. The same thing exists on the other side of this equation. So here is Karaganov very definitely saying what both Putin and Lavrov have said in multiple forums here of late. This is not a war that started on February 24th, 2022. That's what we say all the time. Remember, President Biden forever used to say this unjust and unprovoked war that started in February. The Russians had been saying forever. It didn't start on February 24th, 2022. It didn't even start in 2014. It actually started in 2008 when they were warned, and really even before that. You see, Karaganov goes back 27 years, and that was with the expansion of NATO. It was always about the expansion of NATO, moving closer to the Russian borders. The West has forever said, oh, it had nothing to do with NATO expansion because we want it to be that way. It's convenient for us if we just take that reason and throw it off the table, because now then it is an unjust and unprovoked warfare. But the Russians were saying firmly, we believe this is an existential threat and for us. Putin specifically said that in 2008. Specifically said that in 2008. So continue to move forward. We continue to ignore it. The NATO continued to expand to the east. And when Russia had the capacity to do so, and really the red line aside, because obviously they went into the Balkans after that, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, they joined NATO too. Russians didn't like that, but militarily, that's not as bad because it's really hard for NATO to use that as a pathway to get into Russia. But you talking about Ukraine, that was always the red line because it is easy to roll into Russia from that place. And they've been invaded at least twice by the Western powers in the centuries before that. That's also front and center on the Russians' mind. So they believe that this war started because of the advances in the military alliance of the West, and so they're willing to fight. And you heard him also say that the only regret he has is that they waited until 2022 to actually put this war in to try to get this stuff reestablished. That's critical because if you want to find out what could the West do to get Russia to agree to stop fighting, whether it's for a ceasefire or an end of war negotiations. Lavrov has said numerous times, Putin has said numerous times, that the root causes of this have to be addressed. That's echoed in what Karaganov said there. So what are those root causes? Well, it's NATO in Europe. It's NATO in Ukraine. It's a military alliance. It's a large NATO-funded, NATO-supported, NATO-trained force inside of Ukraine. And then, of course, it's the rights of the ethnic Russians who are still in the eastern part of Ukraine, even on the Ukraine side of that line. All of those things are in. And, of course, Russia has now declared that those 4 oblasts, along with Crimea, are Russian territory. They've written it into their constitution, etc. And again, you don't have to believe that. You can say it was illegal, it was unethical, immoral, whatever. It broke international law. Fair enough. Lots of people can make that argument. I think validly so. You can't just go and take another country's people and territory by saying you had an election here. It just doesn't work that way. At least it's not supposed to. But setting that aside from the fact, again, it matters what the Russians believe, and then it also matters who can and who can't do what. Now, Russia has the military capacity to continue to roll forward and take all the territory they want, even more than they're already taking right now. But in order to keep them from doing that, we're going to have to offer some kind of a concession that will make them say, okay, we don't need to physically conquer it and kill people and destroy things. We can get it through diplomatic means. We can get it through a negotiated agreement. So to do that, obviously, Europe has to be one element of it. President Donald Trump has to be another element. And the leader of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, is the linchpin on this because he is the president of his country. Whether anybody in Russia thinks he's legitimate or not, he is legitimate in the eyes of the West and in his people. So he right now is the leader of the country. He has to agree to some of this, or it doesn't matter what Europe says. It doesn't even matter what President Trump says. There will still be war. Russia will not stop unless they get the terms that they're looking for. And if you wonder how close Zelensky is, here's what he said. I think it was on Saturday.
Our position is that we do not recognize the occupied Ukrainian territories as Russian in any case. I say right away that this is a sensitive issue. I understand our position and realize that this is exactly what the Russians need. Where the Ukrainians are stubborn, that's where they will put the pressure.
So you see that fundamentally on one of the most central parts of what Russia said they require is a recognition of the rights of the ethnic Russians that are in Ukraine, or in this case, what they say is Russian territory in those 4 oblasts. And he's saying, no, we don't accept that. And as a matter of fact, when you look at one of the parliamentarian members and the foreign minister, I think earlier today, they're still saying, we want to keep open the possibility of NATO. We want a robust military in our territory, and we're not going to recognize any of these territories as going back to Russia. So literally the opposite of everything Russia's saying. Now, what kind of hope can President Trump have to go to Putin to say, hey, I want to negotiate a settlement here, when the leader of Ukraine says on 3 of the absolute core reasons that Russia says this war started, which they need resolved before they'll stop fighting, and he won't even agree to that. And I'm talking diametrically opposed. They're not even on the within the range of this camera here. They're so far apart. This is not something that you can get narrowed. Interesting. You had Steve Witkoff say, we showed on our earlier show today, where he said that he was encouraged because Trump and Putin are actually narrowing the band of what the two sides will agree to. And yet you see between Trump and Zelensky, it's still off the charts. Now, between Zelensky and Europe, there's almost no daylight. They seem to be together on this. So when you have Zelensky saying that, hey, there needs to be 4 people at this negotiating table, not just 2, not just Trump and Putin. It needs to be me, Trump, Putin, and Europe as a whole. Somebody has to represent that. So those 4 players need to sit there. Well, if 2 players are off the camera here and the other 2 players are kind of close over here, but there's a whole gulf in between, where is the hope for that this is going to come to any kind of an end soon? And if that gulf exists, then what is this coalition of the willing? What kind of peace do they think they're going to enforce? If there was any way for the West at large to compel Russia to take their sides, folks, it would have already happened. I mean, we've had 3 years to get it done, and it hasn't happened so far. But look, I mean, and even on the first step, at least according to what the West wants, is you got to have a 30-day ceasefire, even to get to the tough negotiations to where you can have an end of war agreement so that this coalition of the willing can actually be employed. Here's what Putin's saying.
Then the question arises, how will issues of control and verification be resolved? How can we be assured, and how will it be guaranteed to us, that nothing like this will take place? How will control be organized? I hope that, at the level of common sense, this is clear to everyone. These are all serious questions. And who will be giving the orders to cease hostilities? And what is the value of these orders? Just imagine almost 2,000 kilometers. Who will determine where and by whom a possible ceasefire agreement has been violated along these 2,000 kilometers? And then, who will be blaming whom for violating this agreement? These are all questions that require thorough examination from both sides. Therefore, the idea itself is correct, and we certainly support it, but there are questions that we need to discuss.
Okay, so you got to understand that I mean, that was a long clip. That was much longer than we normally play, and that's just his questions that he asked for the ceasefire, not even the end of war negotiated terms. That's just to get to the ceasefire, which he says in concept they're willing to do, which is what Trump has asked for, which is what apparently they're negotiating, that they'll be talking on the phone just tomorrow. Now, Steve Witkoff may be right, then maybe they're narrowing in, but then that's going to be the question is, what are the terms of what they're narrowing in? That's one of the most important things I'm going to be interested in seeing, whatever comes out of this. I don't know if there'll be an announcement tomorrow. Trump said it at, I think in that same Air Force One gaggle interview there, that he thinks, there could be something announced tomorrow, but maybe there won't, because if they're narrowing, that still doesn't mean they're close to a negotiation. The fact that they're talking, though, ordinarily means that the two sides are pretty close, because they typically won't bring in the heads of state unless they're ready to announce something. They're not a working level, folks. They're supposed to be, getting ready to knock things out, to announce things. So I do think there's a 50-50 shot that there is something to be announced. But when you see the entry position of the Russian side here talking about, all right, who is going to monitor this situation? And Lavrov has said it ain't going to be anybody with a European patch on their uniform. Nobody. Everything that's the contradictory to everything that the coalition of the willing of Keir Starmer is talking about. So that's almost off the table from one. So apparently Trump won't be able to agree to that, because if Trump agrees to that, then he won't get an agreement out of Putin, because they're saying they're not going to agree to that. Then, there's the issue of who's going to monitor the thing. If it's not going to be Europe, then who is it going to be? How are they going to monitor it? What are the terms of what are the rules of engagement? What are the enforcement mechanisms if somebody violates it? Who's going to hold whom accountable? Who's going to declare that? All of these issues, all the crucial issues, they're very, very important. You may recall from history that the negotiated end of the Korean War took like a year and a half to get going. And they were fighting the whole time that was going on. And it was excruciatingly difficult. Now, in that case, you had two evenly matched sides. So there wasn't a huge power imbalance to where one side could compel the other. That one was closer to parity. So they both had to give and take. This time, that's not quite that way. This time, the Russians don't have to give. They can just take. Or they can say, we'll just simply keep fighting. They apparently are mentally prepared to do that. They have the physical infrastructure to do it. They have the pipelines of everything that you need to fight: munitions, weapons, industrial capacity, manpower, training, intelligence, all the things that you need to sustain war for the near, indefinitely, really, in the near term. Certainly measured in years, they can continue going on there. Not the same on the other side of the equation there. So it would be reasonable for the Ukrainian side to recognize that and say, all right, with Trump going in to talk to Putin on the phone tomorrow, they've been talking with their working level folks at the foreign ministry level, Secretary of State, et cetera. maybe I should say something different. Maybe I should moderate my position a little. That hasn't happened so far. But Trump seems to be focused on really American national interests.
We're doing pretty well, I think, with Russia. And we'll see if we have something to announce maybe by Tuesday. I'll be speaking to President Putin on Tuesday. And a lot of work's been done over the weekend. We want to see if we can bring that war to an end. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but I think we have a very good chance.
So what is going to matter all, and what the $1 million question is, what are the terms of the deal that you think you have a really good chance at? Now, he's signaling to everybody who's willing to listen on the Western side, maybe we'll make a deal, maybe we won't. He's not tied to this. Unlike, it appears, Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron and certainly Volodymyr Zelensky, they're tying their political futures and fortunes to making something happen. Trump is doing the opposite. He's saying, I'd love to have a deal. The killing and the dying is just killing me. It's driving me crazy. I want to stop it. Maybe we'll have a deal, but maybe we won't, because President Trump is already looking beyond the war. He's already saying, hey, this thing is going to come to an end one way or the other, at some point, maybe sooner, maybe later, but it'll come to an end because the war can't just continue to go on. The Ukraine side can't sustain it unless it goes nuclear, of course, and I don't want to go down that path. But on a conventional battlefield, it's going to come to an end. Trump is looking beyond that because he says, all right, we're going to have relations with Russia one way or the other, whether we like it or whether we don't. We did all throughout the Cold War. We did it, in the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when we literally came, within a hair's breadth of getting into a nuclear war, and all the time after that, all the other crises that happened, some before, some afterwards. That's just how it works. We had to have a relationship, so we did, and we have to deal with what's there because it is there. It's a reality. You don't get to wish it away. You don't get to write a script that you prefer to make the other side vanish like you do in a movie. We have to deal with what's there, and he is. So he's saying, all right, I want, you've heard me, the New START treaty expires in about 11 months. There's other new agreements he wants to generate with Russia and China, along with the United States, to minimize the chance of nuclear weapons, et cetera. Also, economic issues. Trump's looking beyond this. So what Trump is not going to do is get into a situation and an agreement with the European Union, with NATO, with this coalition of the willing, with Volodymyr Zelensky, that doesn't acknowledge reality and would keep a war going that could potentially derail American national interest or American vital national interest should it come to blows. He's not going to do that. So I think that President Trump is trying to signal to everyone who's willing to listen, he might walk away from this. He might say, I'm not going to sacrifice American interest, American vital national interest, risk us getting into a war. He's been so emphatic about that in order to try and facilitate your fiction. So I think that he's probably going to come to, this is my guess, of course, I don't have any insider information on this at all. Let me be clear on this. But I wager that Trump is getting with Vladimir Putin to say, all right, this is what I can live with. Trump has himself said, Putin has most of the cards. He didn't have all the cards, but he has most of the cards. So they get to a position where they can say, Trump has said, all right, I'm willing to live with this. If these conditions are met by you, then I'll try and get the Western side on board to get this done. And if I can, then we can bring the war to an end. But if Trump is not able to get the Europeans and the Ukrainian leader together to agree to whatever that determination is, then I think he'll say, then you guys got it. We're not sacrificing our interest. If you want to sacrifice your interest, and if you, Volodymyr Zelensky, want to continue to send your men into a death camp front line, because that's what it will effectively be, you'll be sending them to certain death in some large percentages, probably, if everybody goes for a war that will lose. They will fail. They will fail. It is clear. It is unambiguous. That's just how it's going to work. I'm sorry to be, direct and crude like that, but it's time to be direct. It's no longer time to be pussyfooting around and talking about wishful fantasies and movie scripts. It's time to talk about what's real. And this is, I think, where President Trump is getting us up to. I just see no evidence that he's going to agree to something that would be counter to his interest, that he thinks can't succeed. I've never seen him go and stick hardcore on something that can't succeed. I think that he's going to, especially on something of war and peace, of existential risk and value like this situation here. So we're going to be really interested to see what happens next. And actually, I want to bring in Gary here, see, because he's starting to be a go-to guy to try to help us make some sense out of some of this stuff. But Gary, you've been watching this situation going on for a long time now. You've been seeing how the Europeans keep saying stuff like the clips that you find. And then you keep seeing Trump saying some of the stuff he's saying here. What is your view on kind of what's going on in the European mind as best you can?
Yeah, Danny, I think you're hitting it on the head there. You know how Trump loves to talk so bombastically about everything. It's the best. It's the greatest. He always speaks like that. You don't hear him speaking about these negotiations like that. He always,
That's a good point.
as you pointed out, he always qualifies it. We're going in the right direction, but there's a good chance. There's a good chance. He doesn't talk like that about anything.
That's such a good point.
So for him to qualify it repeatedly, he's so careful every time he talks about this. I think we'll get a deal. Maybe we won't get a deal, but I think we're going to get a deal. But I'm not sure. So it's really quite something that he's so reserved with his outlook on what's happening here. I think that's so telling. The other thing that reminds me, Danny, is that this reminds me, on the schoolyard when two guys are ready to fight. And the words are going back and forth, and you're just waiting. Wow, they're going to come to blows any minute. It's kind of what it feels like right now. The words going back and forth between the EU and Zelensky, and what Putin and Lavrov have been saying back and forth. We're just waiting for it to how long can it go back, taunting each other like this, basically through the press.
And now I wonder, Gary, let's say that that Trump does come back and says some version of what I just said there, that I'm agreeing to this, y'all either get on board or you're on your own. What is Europe going to do? I mean, what do you think if Trump says you guys either agree to this that you obviously don't like, or you're on your own? What are they going to do then?
Boy, they better hope he doesn't do that, because they, by their own admission, that they can't pull off what they're trying to pull off. As much as they believe in it and want it, they can't pull it off without Trump. So, Trump's sitting in a pretty place, actually, because I think he can look heroic because he's done everything he can possibly do. The flying in the ointment is the EU over there trying to do the impossible, and if Zelensky is able to stay in his position, if they don't throw him out of there, they just might end up lengthening this war, and the inevitable ugly, bloody future is what we're looking at.
And let's go down that path too, because that's the one thing I didn't mention at all during the show so far, and that's on the Zelensky part. Because even though they didn't say it in those particular clips, the other thing that is a non-negotiable for the Russian side, they have been unequivocal on this. Whenever a deal is finally agreed to, Zelensky can't sign it. They won't allow. They won't finish it.
Right. Yeah. So who's going to be sitting in the chair with a pen in their hand?
Yeah. That's the question. So they said that there are some in the Rada, the parliament. They said that according to the Constitution could, but can you imagine a situation where Zelensky would allow someone else in the parliament to sign on behalf of the country? Because what they said was there has to be an election. So what do you think happens in Ukraine especially if the European Union, Trump and Putin come to some kind of an agreement, but then before it's implemented, you have to stand for election?
I don't think, I don't think they'll tell him, Danny. They'll arrange this all. They'll have everything set, pens and paper, contracts sitting there waiting, and he won't be invited. And you'll see somebody else just saunter in. Oh, I'm from Ukraine. I'll be, yeah. Could you imagine? Because he's not trustworthy, right? Who knows what? He's a loose cannon. He's already demonstrated that. You can see how he's always flying. You know what I mean? Jittery flying about what's going on. So I jest a little bit as to how it would unfold, but I wouldn't be surprised if somehow through some, I don't know if it's a technicality, a legal technicality, that he just slowly gets pushed off to the side. Oh, we respect you, President, but we're going to continue right here.
And what do you make of the comments? We didn't show them in this show, but of Steve Witkoff, which we showed earlier, where on the one hand he said the differences between Putin and Trump are narrowing, but when it came time to talk about the Ukraine side, he just said we're talking. What did you make of that?
So just what you did, Denny. So revealing. Exactly. He's a smart man. He doesn't. He doesn't throw words around. He's very careful with his speech, right? He knows what to say and what not to say. And it's what he didn't say that was so revealing there. Yeah, I think that was a perfect characterization as to the dynamic that's at play and, who the players really are and how, the Ukrainian position is diminishing and it's fading because for the reasons that we all know.
And one of the other things, let's look at another member of this coalition of the willing, and that is France, because there's almost in a certain sense a competition between Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron. They're kind of like the two trying to be kings or whatever. Interesting that over the weekend, Emmanuel Macron was saying, hey, if you're going to have this coalition of the willing, that France is going to be part of it, and there may be a peace enforcement echelon, and in the future there could be actually a fight between the two sides. Do we have enough troops? And what about having a draft, mandatory service like I think they used to have, and many countries still do? And he's like, yeah, well, actually we won't, because we can't. I was really surprised that he admitted it out loud. Says, no, we don't have the infrastructure, the training, the uniforms, the supplies, or whatever to have that many. And I think the number was 800,000 or something, to be able to have that many recruits at any one time. So we're just gonna have some mobilization. Because to me, if I'm listening with my Russian ear, if I'm on that side, I'm gonna go, hang on, you can't even get people drafted and put them in uniforms, and I'm supposed to be afraid of you?
I wonder what the behind the scenes what Starmer was saying. It's like, man, why are you even invited to this party? Are you kidding me? Hit the road, right?
Yeah. So I don't. I mean, and I don't want to make any jokes, but I mean, what is your assessment of the French component in here and what they can bring to the table?
They can cheer them on. I guess they'll be good cheerleaders. Otherwise, for him to be that. And that quickly, right? It's not like he didn't even take the not the farce, but the impossibility further. He came out with it right at the beginning because he knew, boy, if down the road, I guess they could throw more money at the situation, so they're willing to contribute that. But as far as like you say, manpower or industrial, military aid, things like that, they'll come up empty. So I think he just took a big gulp and said, I'll let you know exactly that I cannot be the partner that you thought I might be.
Yeah. I don't think he wanted to admit that, but I was a little surprised he actually admitted it out loud. I thought he'd say something, oh yeah, we'll take care of that, and move on to whatever's next. But he actually was honest about it. One other aspect from the Russian side, and how they're viewing this, was actually voiced by a Ukrainian colonel not long ago. You may remember when we used this. I don't remember if it was a soundbite or a full screen of a quote, but there was a Ukrainian colonel that says, listen, for all the trouble our army has right now, we're better than any European army. We're bigger. We have more experience. You guys don't have any combat experience. What do you think? How do you think the Russians view this coalition, the willing, in terms of their actual fighting capacity when, like France and Germany and UK both, all they've ever done is like peacekeeping stuff in Africa, peace enforcement, or the Iraq, or not the Iraq, but the Afghanistan war, where they were doing counterinsurgency stuff. They don't have any modern combat experience or equipment.
Danny, you often say this, and that's so striking to me. Anybody that's played a sport knows it's totally different practice and then playing in the game.
Yeah.
That's just a subtle comparison to what it would be like in war with bombs going off next to you and bullets flying by your head. So to think that even if they did have the numbers, they did have the hundreds of thousands of troops, even if France did have those men, there's just no comparison to what they'd be skilled and able to pull off on a battlefield when they have, like you just said, they haven't fought. So how do you expect to put somebody in the game and throw touchdowns? It's just not going to happen.
And for Russia to be compelled to concede something that they don't want to, they have to feel that there's a credible threat on the other side. And that's what it's just puzzling to me. I don't know. Maybe, Gary, maybe it's just part of the same delusionary mentality that they're making these grandiose statements. Maybe they're just making it for their domestic audience because they want to sound tough. They want to be tough. And maybe they know, well, Trump's going to agree to something that we're not going to, and he's not going to give us the backstop that you saw Lord Ricketts talk about a minute ago. So we're never actually going to have to make good on this. So we'll just talk tough and then say, well, Trump agreed to this.
Exactly.
So now we have to go to it.
And then they can point fingers, right?
Yeah. You know what? Now that we're saying that out loud, I'm starting to think maybe that's behind it. Maybe it's really not this delusion so much as we're just posturing for the end, and then we're going to be blaming it all on President Trump.
Absolutely. Oh, Danny, I think so much so. Listen, they're not stupid people. They're delusional, but they're not stupid. There's sometimes a fine line between those differences there.
Now, I may say that the president of the Ukraine, he may be in the delusionary camp, but I think the other ones are more in the, we know how to work the cameras, and we know what's coming in later. So, I think that,
sure.
So, and who knows? Maybe Trump's aware of that too. Maybe they're negotiating teams because they're talking to all these people at very high levels behind the scenes all the time. So
Danny,
maybe this is just part of a choreographed dance.
Listen, I think Trump. Listen, as all the faults that he has, he's not stupid either, and I think he can read people. I think that's one of his gifts, actually. Whatever it is, whatever he does, behind closed doors in those meetings, and sizing up people. He knows how to size up people. I think that is something that he's
without
very
question.
skilled at.
Yeah. I mean,
right, exactly right.
Even before he got into politics, he was good at that.
Yeah, listen, he was fooled in his first term, right? He was just too much wishful thinking, and he brought a lot of people on board that he shouldn't have. He's not doing that this time, as we know. So he's read the room. He knows he's sizing up the people now with a greater maturity and I probably even a little bit more skepticism. Like he didn't have enough skepticism his first term, so he brought on all these war hawks and people that misled him and had no allegiance to him. That's not how, at least as far as we can tell at this point in time, that doesn't seem to be happening now. So the team and he's assembling and getting back to his skill set of evaluating situations and people, is top notch.
Yeah, I think so. And really, I mean, maybe a lot of this is choreographed, and everybody's playing their part. But at the end, there's going to be an agreement that is going to bring the war to an end. Because look, I don't think it's also lost on the European side that they'll benefit if this war is over. They've already committed themselves to a military buildup, so they're going to increase defense spending no matter what. So economically, they're going to benefit from that. But they also benefit from stopping the anger between the two sides, so they get that cheap gas turned back on again, and they don't have to spend as much money on Ukraine and just have this money going out the door for nothing all the time. So I think that there's probably a lot of desire to end this.
Yeah, I don't think that money's going out for nothing. It's going into the proper pockets that they've
all right, fair enough.
Directed it
fair
to.
Enough.
So Danny, listen, you bring up choreography. And I love that. You didn't even know that what I'm about to present here to you, but the choreography that's going on is rather, stunning. Actually, we all remember just last week when out of nowhere, he goes to the front lines, Putin, with military garb on, right? And everybody was just taken aback. It's like, what the heck is going on? Is he gonna pick up a rifle? Or is it, what's going on? So, and what everybody was just shocked, like, what the heck is this? Well, it's not stopping there, Danny. They're ramping it up. I don't know if you noticed, this is the shot that we played during the show here of Karaganov. Now look at this gentleman. Do you see what's on the wall there? Listen, now here's what's interesting about this bear skin. He didn't shoot this bear. Look at how pristine his pelt is, right? He wrestled this bear and then choked it out so he could have a good skin and then hang it on his wall. Now, unlike the deer on his wall, he shot that. That's why you only see the head. But with the bear skin, this guy means business. And look at this old codger. From what I heard, he just did this last month. So it's not like, these Russians are soft. They're getting soft as they get older. No, they mean business. So just think of the image that they've got going. Just, of sheer, just sheer aggression and raw masculinity. This is who they are standing, and that's the message they're sending. That's their psychology.
And see, here's the difference between the West and the Russians so far anyway. This is backed up on the battlefield. They're actually accomplishing something on that. And this collapse of the entire Kursk operation is evidence of that. And by the way, and Gary, I'm not sure I've even had a chance to tell you yet, because right before we went on the air here, I got a note from a Russian journalist who has been at the Kursk front throughout this whole thing is agreed to join us tomorrow. We're working out the exact time, but is going to tell us. She's been on the site with the generals and the troopers and everything else, and has seen it firsthand. Is going to tell us what actually happened there. We've seen the reports, we've seen the map, but we're going to find out tomorrow what was really going on back there, and then what may come next, because that's a big question we have here. But the bottom line is that matching all that imagery that you just showed there, they just had a crushing victory on the field, which took what was alleged to have been a negotiating point for the Ukraine side out of their hands. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, then, Danny, then all we can do is compare it to what's going on. Give me 1 second. There we go. As to what's going on, so we see what the Russians are doing and the message that they're sending. With their messaging. Compare that to what's going on in the West. Now, listen, David Petraeus. You maybe think he was using reverse psych. You maybe think he was using reverse psychology here. So we're going to show what we're going to show because they're showing the bears. But I'm not going to give him the benefit of the doubt, Danny. I think he's just way behind. He doesn't have the skill to do the stagecraft, the spy craft of what's needed. And that's what we're left with. So, it doesn't look good, at least as far as the diplomacy on the media. So let's just hope that they do, Hegseth and the others, get their act together and don't do what Petraeus is doing.
Whatever he does, don't. That's
exactly.
Oh, what a great juxtaposition there. Well done on that.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we appreciate you guys being with us today. We're going to continue to bring you all the information. And by the way, this feature we're doing now, we're going to start doing this more often because it kind of adds a new dynamic into what we do, this free flow kind of deal. So especially if Gary keeps doing stuff like this, people are going to be tuning in at the end of the show, probably more than the beginning. But anyway, we appreciate you guys being with us. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't. Then also we're on podcast now. We're not just on the YouTube. We're also on podcast. Anywhere you get your podcasts, just type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive podcast, Spotify, etc., and you'll find us there too. And I know a lot of you like to listen to podcasts. Thanks very much, and we'll see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.
Yeah, and everybody, please check out Danny. He did a late night radio broadcast with a Britain radio show. And we've loaded it up. It's on the video tab, and it's Danny at his finest, defending American stance against what Biden was doing and what we're now doing. And you hear Danny shoot down the host in a very gentlemanly way. I think you'll love hearing him. He's red hot. So please check out that video.
Thank you. See y'all next time.
See ya.